What's happening, folks? I'm Andy the Electric Geek, and yes, I did drive over 400 miles into another country, no less, to see Oppenheimer in IMAX 70mm. And not only that, but I dragged my good lady wife along for the ride also. Was it worth it? Let's find out. So I guess the first thing you have to address in this kind of video is, of course, why? So I stay in Ayr, which is in the kind of southwest of Scotland if you're not from the country or familiar with it. Just up the road, 30-minute drive or so, we have Glasgow, which actually has 3 different IMAX theatres, all with different spec. And the closest one of the 3 is actually fitted with the latest technology, so that's IMAX laser with 4K projection and 12-channel sound. But the reason I decided to go down to Manchester, the Manchester Printworks, which is a Vue Cinema venue, is because it was one of only 3 cinemas in the entire UK that was shown Oppenheimer in its native format, and that is IMAX 70mm. So the director of this movie, Christopher Nolan, decided to shoot the entire film in 70mm, or for the 70mm format. Some of it in IMAX 70mm, which is the kind of gold standard as far as any kind of video recording goes, be it for documentaries or movie making like this. And the other part of the film, the majority of the film actually on regular 70mm, but this has huge advantages over standard 35mm, which most movies are filmed on, or certainly they were before the kind of migration to digital filmmaking. To put that into some kind of resolution context, it's estimated that IMAX 70mm can capture up to around 16K, when you think that the kind of digital standard in cinemas in the home is 4K currently. So that kind of gives you an idea of just how much image can be captured and how lifelike that's going to be when it's played back in a cinema. On a personal level, a big motivation to travel down to Manchester to see it in this format was just simply because it's a chance to witness a bit of filmmaking history, really. We don't really get cinemas, certainly that project 70mm or 35mm movies anymore, ever since we've kind of migrated to digital projection. But to see one that's been filmed in IMAX 70mm, presented in its native aspect ratio of 1:43:1, which, if you don't know what that means, it just means a massive tall image, much taller than conventional widescreen movies or even digital IMAX, which is still cropped at 1:90:1. And even the movie's director, Christopher Nolan, has came out and said that this is the gold standard. This is the definitive way to watch the movie. So being a massive fan of his and owning all of his movies on Blu-ray and 4K and whatnot, if he says that's the definitive way to watch it, then you can be damn sure I'm going to do everything in my power to see it on that format. My wife, on the other hand, couldn't have cared less, but given that we've got 2 really young kids, she just seen it as an opportunity to get out of the house for the day, so she was happy with that. I still think she would rather have seen Barbie though. Would you rather be seeing Barbie?
Yes.
So with our kids shipped away to the grandparents for the weekend, my wife and I got up on Sunday the 23rd of July, so that was 2 days after its general release, and we got up at 6:30 in the morning so that we could drive down and make the 12:30 showing at the Manchester Printworks. As I say, it took us about 4.5 hours with a brief stop to get there, and we arrived with about 10 minutes to spare, and it was a little bit of a rush, but we got in there just as the kind of trailers were coming to the end. And I have to say, having been in a few IMAX theatres in Glasgow, I was immediately taken aback with the sheer size of the screen, more so with the actual verticality of it. So I immediately understood why this is one of the 3 venues that could show it in that native 1:43:1 aspect ratio, as I kind of mentioned earlier. It was an absolute sellout. There was not a seat left in the place, and my wife and I were seated in seats F37 and 38, which hopefully you can see in this diagram. They weren't ideal seats. We were in the kind of middle tier, but the extreme right, and I was a bit worried going down that that was going to detract from it. And obviously it would have been better to have sat more in the centre, but believe me, it was still a fantastic experience and still the best cinema experience I've ever had. The Manchester Printworks screen is the 2nd largest IMAX screen in the UK, second only to the BFI IMAX in London. And it's not a kick in the backside off the size of that screen, to be fair. The screen measures in at 26.3 metres wide by 18.8 metres high. That equates to an overall screen size of 495 metres squared and 485 metres squared when projecting a 1:43:1 image. Just to really give that some context, that's the equivalent to 417 65-inch TV screens. It's fitted out with the latest tech digitally, so it has IMAX laser, which is 4K laser projection, and that comes with 12 channel surround. So the 12 channel surround combined with the IMAX 70mm is probably an unparalleled experience when it comes to Oppenheimer. So as soon as the movie started, I was absolutely wowed. Totally surpassed my expectation. I was a bit worried, obviously, having travelled all that distance and having a state-of-the-art IMAX 4K up the road, that I wouldn't actually notice too much difference and I'd feel a bit silly, but I really wasn't. As soon as it opened up, I could see the difference straight away. Christopher Nolan explains it to some of his cast. IMAX is being 3D without the glasses, and that is exactly what it's like. It is totally tangible. The detail in the actors' faces is unreal, and it's the depth that it lends is just second to none. You really do feel like you could just reach out and touch these people on the screen, that they aren't actually being projected at all, and you're just looking at giants performing this amazing drama in front of you. Particularly when it cuts to the 1:4:3:1 aspect ratios and we see these characters in this grand scale, pretty much from the bottom of the visible floor all the way to the roof of the Printworks. I will say when it cuts back, there isn't actually much difference, so you're pretty much completely immersed by what you're seeing in front of you throughout the entire film. I actually couldn't concentrate on the film for the first 10 minutes because, being the type of person I am, someone that loves picture quality and marvels at the kind of technical side of it, I just couldn't focus on what was happening in the movie. I just kept looking at how beautiful the image was, and I eventually had to kind of give myself a bit of a slap and remind myself that I was here to actually enjoy this movie, knowing that it was probably going to be amazing, and I didn't want to miss out on some of the dialogue and important character points just because I was gawking at the screen, basically. And bear in mind, I'm saying it had this impact on me when I was sitting on pretty much the extreme right of the cinema, which obviously meant that the screen appeared slightly narrower to me. I still had the full scale vertically, but it obviously gave the illusion that the screen was slightly narrower than it actually is in real life, or than it is when you're sitting in a more central position. But it still completely immersed me, and I didn't feel like I'd wasted my money at all. But after the movie, I did kind of fantasise a bit about how good it would have been to have been sitting in a really central position. When it comes to the difference between digital and film, obviously I've only seen the movie once. However, it was just so nice and nostalgic to be sitting in a movie and actually see the imperfections of a film being projected. Now I know that sounds daft because I'm just speaking about how much of a spectacle it was visually and how crisp and sharp and how much depth there was, and all that's still there, but occasionally you'll get the odd bit of dirt or, you know, a little imperfection in the film which just reminds you that it's film, and it does have that overall filmic look. You can just tell that it's not digital, it's not overly sharp, it's not too clean looking. There's just something organic about it, and that's so fitting with this film because it's obviously a period drama that's set back in the 1940s, and that just lends something to the movie. It lends something to the overall immersion in the back of your mind as you're watching it also. So not only is it a technical marvel, but it's thematic as well, watching it on a film format, be it 70mm or even 35mm. It just lends an authenticity to it that I would imagine would be lacking watching it in a digital format. I should also just quickly mention that the film itself is an absolute triumph. For a 3-hour movie, it does not feel like that at all. I've sat through 2-hour movies, 2.5-hour movies that have felt a lot longer than Oppenheimer, and that's really something, given that other than an atomic bomb going off at one point, there isn't really anything that happens, you know, action-wise. It's purely dialogue-driven, character-driven, fantastic performances, I should say, on that also. But it's Nolan's direction style, it's his storytelling, the pacing is absolutely perfect. The score suits the entire movie brilliantly and racks up the tension, like the scores of Christopher Nolan films always manage to do. But this one in particular is very notable. I would say it's one of the best scores in a Christopher Nolan movie. The sound design is fantastic, and the IMAX 12-channel sound really does it justice. There were actually a few times where I absolutely jumped out my skin due to the sound design. The movie is definitely up there in the top 3 anyway for me. It's difficult to rank it at the moment because I've only seen it once, and I would like another viewing just to kind of solidify its position, but I definitely think it's going to end up in my top 3 just from that initial viewing. I think it could fairly be described as essential viewing on almost a humanitarian level, and when you leave the cinema you will be hollowed out mentally and emotionally, and if you're watching it with your friend or your partner like I was, you'll be talking about it for hours afterwards. I would absolutely recommend checking out Oppenheimer in IMAX 70mm. I would agree with the director, Christopher Nolan, that this surely must be the definitive way to watch this film. And if you're a film fan, you owe it to yourself to try and seek out one of these cinemas. Now, I appreciate not everyone's going to be able to do that. I went above and beyond, but that's just not going to be a possibility for everyone, and maybe you don't want to kind of shell out the cash. I live in the west coast of Scotland, and to drive to the Manchester Printworks, it was roughly about 220 miles. It cost me about 50 quid in fuel, and I was fortunate that the car park adjacent to it that is recommended on the Printworks website does an early bird offer. So if you book your ticket for the car park in advance between 6 and 9, I believe it is, you get a flat rate of £5. I think it's for the day, or certainly it'll be enough time for you to get in and out and watch the movie anyway, like we did. If you don't book it during that time, you'll pay roughly about 25 quid. I think it's about £5 an hour roughly. So it is pretty costly when you think that's almost half the price of the fuel it cost me to get down there just to park for 5 hours or so. But definitely check out that early bird discount if you do decide to drive down and use that car park. Tickets themselves at the Printworks will cost you $14.99. There are cheaper options, but they move you closer to the screen. And just on that, I would say that the regular seats are where you want to be. We were seated in row F, which I would say was probably just in front of middle, and I felt like that was about the limit of where you'd want to sit comfortably, because otherwise you're going to have a sore neck just staring up at these tall images for 3 hours. The seats do actually recline, which is quite handy. My wife's only 5'2" and wasn't actually heavy enough to keep it back, so she kept finding herself returning to her original position. But I had no issue with it, and that is handy because you are looking up higher than you would be in a conventional cinema. But if I were you, try and get yourself in the kind of back third of the cinema, somewhere central, for that kind of optimal experience. Manchester Printworks is actually the cheapest of the 3 IMAX cinemas that are showing it also. So if you want to see it in either of the 2 London venues, the London Science Centre or the BFI IMAX, you will be looking at paying something like 25 to 30 quid a ticket. IMAX 70mm, in my opinion, is the absolute best way to see it, but I appreciate not everyone is absolutely mental like me and wants to drive 400 miles or more just to see a movie. At the end of the day, it is just a movie. I appreciate it's not going to be a life-changing event for most. To that end, if you're also from my neck of the woods in the kind of central belt area of Scotland, then I highly recommend checking out one of these 2 venues. The first being IMAX at the Cineworld in Silverburn, just outside Glasgow. It's got the latest technology of the 3 IMAX theatres, and although it can't show it in the 1:4:3:1 ratio due to the limitations of its vertical screen size, you will get a fantastic experience there with the 12-channel sound and the 4K image. It's going to be super crisp. If you want that more original thematic film projection experience, then you can go to the Glasgow Film Theatre, which is in the city centre of Glasgow, and they're showing it on conventional 70mm, so you won't again get those height ratios, but it's the next best thing as far as film projection goes, certainly visually. Just on that, I will link down in the description a fellow Scottish YouTuber who's done an excellent comparison video between those 2 sites to help you decide which one best suits you. But whatever you do, just see Oppenheimer on as big a screen as you can. It's definitely a movie that deserves that big screen experience. And don't just wait to pick it up on 4K Blu-ray or catch it on streaming. You're definitely doing yourself an injustice if you don't see this on the big screen. And just a quick couple of shout outs before I go. Firstly to fellow YouTuber John Clancy of the Movie Collector channel. If it hadn't been for John, I definitely wouldn't have gone down to Manchester Printworks. I'll be honest and say I didn't even realise there was differences when it came to video projection and film projection. I probably would have thought that digital being newfangled and fancy would have been a better experience, but through watching his channel and being educated, I kind of learned that IMAX 70mm was definitely the way to go. So thanks John for putting me on the right track, and definitely check out his channel if you want to learn more certainly about IMAX film projection. I'll link a cracking video he's done just on that subject in the description also. And last but certainly not least, just a quick shout out to my wife who was mad enough to accompany me on my mad mission over the border to see this movie. But that's all for this one. I really hope that's gave you an insight and convinced you that you need to go and see this movie on that format. They are still showing it at the Manchester Printworks, and at London I believe they will be doing so for another few weeks, but looking online they're already selling out fast, so if you do fancy it, make sure you give yourself enough time and book good seats in advance. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video. If you're into all this stuff and you enjoy watching movies in highest quality, then please consider subscribing to my channel, because I mainly cover 4K Blu-ray reviews, home cinema tech and all that good stuff. But I've been Andy, Electric Geek. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in another video.